Hey guys, Chad Corbett, founder of Probate Mastery and the Magnum Opus Project. I just got a voice message through Facebook Messenger from one of our members, James. And James is in the Atlanta market. He's just finishing up a deal where he's got a $100,000 capital gain, and he's looking to try to create as much liquidity and leverage as possible out of that. So he had asked, to me to kind of recap how I look for the right community banks. You guys have heard me talk about establishing relationships with community or regional banks. So you can basically have portfolio loan products at your fingertips based on a relationship and asset-based lending on the commercial side. So I wanted to, rather than just let this be one coaching call that I spend today trying to schedule, I figured I would just make this video for James, and then everybody else could benefit from this. I've never actually slowed down because it's always talked about on coaching calls. I've never really slowed down and said, here's exactly what I do. So let's jump to my screen and I'll show you the tools that I use and the methodology, and we'll talk about, kind of how we gauge bank health and kind of make our short list of banks to visit and spread our deposits across. The best tool that I've found to quickly do this, and I'm talking in under 60 seconds typically, it's obviously going to take a little longer for me to explain everything, but a lot of times on coaching calls or when I'm helping friends, I'll quickly look up banks here while we're carrying on a conversation. So if you go to depositaccounts.com/banks/health.aspx pound Texas, that's the shortcut I have saved. What I do, there's no really simple query tool on the home page. So what I do is I quickly come to this page, and there's a little best and worst banks filter down here. So I'm going to change this to the healthiest banks. In James's case, we're looking in Georgia, and we're going to go assets of 1 billion. Typically, I try to work with banks that are, community banks that are in that $1 to $5 billion range are usually pretty hungry for growth. So one of the things I wish this had was a map search function. So I looked at James's customer record, and he looks like he's in Atlanta proper, his address. So the only bank I see here that's actually in Atlanta is a $23.75 billion bank, which is significant. I mean, that's a pretty good size. I don't know anything about Ameris. I would guess they're probably a regional bank. They're probably in multiple counties throughout the state, if not multiple states throughout the southeast. First Citizens Bank, who I often use, until they acquired CIT Bank recently, they were a $24 billion bank, which normally is getting too big. But depending on the bank, First Citizens really prides themselves on behaving like a community bank. So that's one. Another one, like the Piedmont. So they have a very good Texas ratio. They're a smaller bank, around 2 billion. So this one catches my attention. So let's click in here. Now, what you're going to look at, these reviews I find aren't that reliable. All you have to do is make one person mad because they had to pay a $5 banking fee, and they come leave a bad review. What I find most important is the health rating, which is based on regulatory data. So if we scroll down here, see we've got one that says they're complaining about an experience with a teller. So it's not very, indicative of a crappy bank just because they got one bad review out of two. So what we're going to look at here, your Texas ratio. So if you click on this, it'll explain. It's basically liquidity within the bank. So how healthy are they from a liquidity standpoint? And then we look at that on a trend. So what is, if they're an A plus now, if they've been a D for 5 years prior, the trend is very helpful for that. Is their deposit growth, is, how much is their leverage growing? So are they in a growth mode where they're attracting new deposits every day that they gain leverage off of, so they'd be eager to lend that money out. So their overall score is an A plus, which is really good. Their bank size is 1.79 billion as of the fourth quarter of 2020, of 2021. So you can see they grew last year from a $1.37 billion bank year over year to be a 1.79 billion. They grew their loans from 1.01 billion to 1.15 billion. and grew deposits. So you can actually see this growth. They went from 138 million in equity capital to 180. The other thing I look at is their real estate owned, or REO. This is their, these bottom two categories are their distressed assets. So if they have the equity capital, they have 180 million to lend. They have 730,000 in REO. Now, this is another way that you can find opportunity, because just because this is REO doesn't mean it's being marketed. The bank may be holding it until a tenant cycles through, if it's a commercial tenant, because it's actually making money and it makes sense to hold that till into the next tax year or into the next quarter. So sometimes it's not for sale, but if you approach the bank, if you build a relationship with the asset managers in these smaller banks, that's possible. You can actually walk in and have those conversations, or you can make a phone call, or they'll call you. So I would say, James, this is a good bank to start with. This is, there's obviously more on here, but you can look through these and kind of build your short list. And again, these are just the top, I don't know what the count is here, probably 15 or so in your area based on the health of the bank. Let's just grab one more, and for comparison, we'll go down here to the bottom of the list and grab it. So we can see here they've got a B+ rating, 25 branches. They have 5-star review, but it's only one person. So again, this has less weight than anything we're going to look at. So they have an A Texas ratio, but they have an A+ trend. Now what this could indicate is they're now starting to trend down, but they're still not in bad shape. Their deposit growth is good. Their capitalization is not good. C is dropping in the troublesome territory. But we've got a $2 billion bank that grew year over year. They've got also 706,000 in REO. But here's something to look at. So last year, I would have steered clear of this bank, or in 2020 I would have, because they had 9.9 million in distressed assets on the books. They've been able to liquidate that inventory and get down to 706,000. And they've got 1.91 billion in deposits and 152 million ready to loan. This would be a bank that I would approach, because they're this year with $10 million on the books as distressed assets, they're wanting to recover from that, right? And they're showing that they're in growth mode. So this would be another one, and I'm not even sure how close this is to Atlanta. This might be out of reach. But this is the tool that I use to kind of build my short list if I don't know which banks to go to. Sometimes, it's usually better to just ask around and use your sphere of influence to figure out who the people you want to be more like. Who do they bank with? The real estate investors that are really doing a good job of a sound finance strategy, who do they invest with? But this is the tool we use. And if you have any questions, you can, drop a comment in the show notes. So now that we've kind of selected, let's just say, the top 3 banks that we want to approach and start a relationship with, what are we supposed to do with that? What I did when I first moved here from Hawaii, I had no banking relationships. My banks were in Tennessee and West Virginia, so I had no Virginia banking relationship for sure. I knew I was going to get into real estate investing. I knew that someday I would need, a lending relationship, but I didn't want to wait until I had a deal on the hook and had all that urgency. So I went ahead and proactively, I took 40,000 the first day. I went to 2 banks. So I went to Valley Bank, which has since been purchased, and Hometown Bank, which has also been rolled up in an acquisition. So both of those were kind of community banks that met the score, that I just showed you. So they were in that growth there, a small, over $1 billion, but still relatively small and aggressively trying to grow, which banks in that state, typically they tend to love local real estate because they have, more security than they do in small business loans, auto loans, student loans, anything like that. So when they're in growth mode, when they're being aggressive, it's not uncommon for them to offer, really, really attractive terms. And that's where a lot of coaches and people will tell you, oh, you can't rely on banks. You got to have hard money lenders, private money lenders. The guys that I know that have, hundreds and hundreds of doors, they have traditional banking relationships. They're not out begging doctors for private money loans at 8%. They're just calling the bank and saying, "Hey man, I got this one with a debt service coverage ratio of 1.4. What can you do for me on it?" And they close in 30 days. They're throwing blanket liens over 100 houses to cross-collateralize acquisitions on new purchases, and using the equity that they've built in their portfolio as security. So it's don't be so quick to believe everything you hear about how hard it is for real estate investors to bank with community banks. It just simply hasn't been true in my career, and in some of the most the most professional investors I've ever seen, and the ones I currently know, they do just what I'm talking about. They're not playing the hard money game. It's certainly easier, and there's less underwriting if you want to go pay 1 to 4 points up front and 12 to 15% for hard money, but it's not necessary. And this is what I'm showing you here is just a proactive way to get more favorable financing terms. So if you're that far along, something I didn't do but I probably should have was prepare a personal financial statement that actually showed my whole picture. And something I've done since then, I actually have a mind map of my entire business structure, because between retirement accounts, life insurance, all of the things that they would want to look at as security, it's kind of hard to understand if I just give you a list how it interconnects, because some of the insurances are tied to certain companies or entities, and some of the retirement accounts are tied to certain entities for certain reasons. So what I have is a mind map, and I just start with Chad Corbett, and then the companies the entities that I own, and then those entities, what else might be attached to them, like investments. So, for example, I have one of my companies as a holding company, so it goes from Chad Corbett to Resolutions Real Estate Services to the assets that company actually holds, and even sometimes further than that. Those assets that the company holds are oftentimes shares in other companies, and then that company holds assets. For example, Resolutions is a member of an investment club company that I'm the president of that company, and through that company I own multiple private equity and real estate investments. So it's easier to start this relationship off, and it's easier to cover ground quickly and have them develop a mental picture of what your overall estate looks like and what security the bank might have in the event that they start the relationship with you and you pass away. Where are they left? It's not really about you being a big risk. It's just things that are out of our control is what bankers are trying to underwrite for. So that's one thing I would recommend, is have a visual diagram of how your estate is structured and how they can attach to those assets for security. That will make you look a lot less risky. The next thing that I should have had was a personal financial statement. So I should account for every monthly payment, every liability, every bit of debt that I have, also all of the assets. If you keep QuickBooks on yourself personally as well as your companies, which I very fortunately started doing that in 2011. And like this house, for example, it started out as a primary residence, but then I ended up becoming a Florida resident. This is technically a second home now, and I do short-term rental with it. So now I can go back and grab all of those expenses from 2011, add that into the cost basis on this asset, and reduce the taxation on the gain. So if you're not keeping QuickBooks on yourself as a person, it's worth doing for a few extra bucks a month, especially if you have an opportunity. Like for example, I bought a probate deal just a few months ago in my holding company, but then I walked into First Citizens Bank and they had this home renovation loan that was an unsecured loan. But they wouldn't offer it to a multi-million-dollar business, LLC, but they would offer it to a person it has a personal guarantee, but there's no collateral, like it's an unsecured loan. So I just simply went to the courthouse, quit-claimed the deed from my company to myself personally, and then went and got a $50,000 home improvement loan at 3.49%, which was less than the 5.25% business line of credit that I was going to use. So the bank ultimately made less money, and it cost me $127 to roll that asset. But now I have to book that asset and my basis on my own personal QuickBooks. So having if you have your personal finances in QuickBooks, go ahead and pull a full 2 years of balance sheets and profit and loss statements and detailed profit and loss. If you can use the shortcut in QuickBooks Online. So you have that. You have a mind map or some other flow chart or diagram of your overall, estate and all of the assets that you have and the liabilities you have. And you walk into the bank. You can meet with a teller at first. What I did is I chose 2 banks and I put $20,000 in each bank. So $20,000 in the first bank. Set up a free business checking account. Asked to meet the branch manager. Ask the branch manager who was in charge of commercial lending for that branch. Typically, that will be the person that wants to talk to you in a smaller bank. We closed the office door. I said, here's who I am today. Here's who I intend to be tomorrow. I'm happy to have you pull my credit score, but what I'm looking for is to establish, a finance strategy before I go out and find the assets. So I'd like to ask for a business line of credit for the business, and I would like to ask for for you to walk me through all of the available real estate loan products that might be available to me, and go ahead and start underwriting me. So when I come back to you with an asset, we just need to underwrite the asset. You know that you and I know that we have an agreement on a finance strategy. I was really shocked at 29 years old when I first tried this. Put 20 grand in the bank, and you've got to understand, when you put 20 grand in the bank, that gives them 200 to lend out. So you're giving them leverage, interest free in most cases. So they're excited about that because their score just went up. Those scores that I just showed you, that's why putting a significant amount of capital in there, and the more you put in, the more serious you're taking, by the way. But that gets their attention. People they've probably never had an appointment like this. I've done this in Tennessee, Virginia, Hawaii, and West Virginia, and I've yet to meet a banker who didn't go, "Who the hell are you? Like, what? Like, I've never had a conversation like this. This is interesting." And hopefully, we're trying to get through the red tape, but hopefully, I'm going to actually introduce you guys to the people from First Citizens Bank that I have these conversations with. We've got to make sure that everything's FDIC compliant, yada yada. So once I had established that first relationship, then I went to Hometown Bank. I did the exact same thing, and it came off the exact same way. Made my deposit with the teller, walked over to the branch manager. Door was closed. We had a great conversation. In that one, they actually set up an introduction with the president of that bank, which was in the downtown office, not in the branch office. So I went down, met with the president, basically said, "Hey, I have 0 rental properties. I just want to know that if I get a property under contract, I can count on you, if it's under contract for cash, I want to have a relationship where I can confidently know that we can close a community bank loan, a portfolio loan, in that 30-day period. So I can treat, institutional money, like community bank money, just like cash." And he's like, "Yeah, we can do that. We'll go 85 LTV for someone like you with your credit, and it sounds like you got enough experience. You're clear on what you're doing with these." So that was it. That's all it took to get over $100,000 in lines of credit and commitments for asset-based loans with no limits. With a DSCR loan, they're not going to say, like with conventional or Fannie Freddie, like it's 4 loans and then you max out. You start going into higher interest rates and all kinds of BS. With commercial lending that we're talking about, there's really no limitation. As long as the asset meets a debt service coverage ratio of usually, some banks are as lenient as 1.25. I find that 1.3 is typically the magic number with banks of this size. So as long as the payments, your total debt service, the rent equals at least 130% of your debt service payments, then you should be good to go. You can have, I've helped investors sell portfolios with Bank of Botetourt was a really good example of a bank like this. I've helped them, sell portfolios of over 150 homes with one bank, one person, and another one of the buyers of that portfolio. I know that between he and his father, they have almost 800 homes financed this way. That's their primary finance strategy, and they're high-level CPAs. So these are, financial professionals that are using community banks as their primary funding source, and they have millions of dollars of cash. So this is how I do it. I've done this for amounts as little as $20,000 and as much as 150 million. That the 150 million wasn't for my personal business. That was to close out the condo project in Maui in the 2008 environment when banks wouldn't let go of money. We were able to actually get a letter of intent and secure $150 million tranches at a time from one of the biggest banks in the world. So I've had a little bit of experience. I came into this green, and I haven't been to business school or anything like that. It's just, remember, these people they're salespeople. Like, their job is to find a way through sales and marketing to attract deposit capital, and then find a way through sales and marketing to get that money lent back out with as little risk as possible. So if you walk in prepared, if you have a personal financial statement, you have a P&L, a balance sheet, a flow chart of your estate, and you bring in a big wad of cash and throw in a deposit account and put that on a branch manager or bank president's desk, it's probably never happened. If it has, it's happened with some of their best. It's been their best borrowers who behave this way. So you will kind of automatically adopt that reputation of, oh, this is my future best borrower. So that's what I would recommend. Now let's talk about, so in James's case, he had $100,000 that he wants to use. So you could put $100,000 in one bank and make a big splash. Probably not necessary. When you put that kind of money down, though, the one thing I will say, you can walk into a credit union or a community bank, put $100,000 on deposit, ask for a meeting with the president, and sit down and say, listen, I just gave you $100,000. We both know you have $1 million in lendability. How about now you issue me $1 million CD, a 6-month CD for $1 million, instead of spending my money or going through a purchase loan. You issue me a line of credit, or I'll purchase a $100,000 CD. I'm sorry. Instead of a deposit, I'll purchase a $100,000 CD. Then you give me $1 million business line of credit with that as collateral, as well as the asset that I'm purchasing. And in 6 months, we'll come to you for the long-term cash out, the long-term refinance. I've seen that strategy used successfully up to, I think, $2.5 million is probably the most I've seen that actually work. That was at a small community bank in Arkansas, actually. That one wasn't me, that was my friend Nigel, but using the same strategy that we're discussing here, Nigel is one of the few people that agree with me that this is the best way to finance real estate. And it can happen with new construction, it can happen with complete rebuilds, it can happen with fully stabilized assets. But anyways, think about the possibility of, do I need to make that big splash and ask for something so specialized like what I just referenced? Or would it make more sense for me to take $20,000 and go to 5 different banks and establish 5 new relationships? So then when you get your next asset ready to purchase, you shop it out. So you've done the same thing with all 5 guys. They all are people. They all trust you. They all they're eager to borrow, to lend to you, to have you as their next best borrower. Now you send an email, copy all 5 of them and say, hey guys, in a hurry, got to get this done inside of 30 days. Please let me know what your rate and terms will be on this. I'll follow up tomorrow. And then put them all in the same group, which shows them you're not messing around. They need to be competitive and putting the right loan product out there for your strategy. If you do this, you'll have more money than you'll ever use. Like, you can't go through it all. And that's what, when I first met with the president of Hometown, I'm like, Peter, like, there's got to be some limit. Like, if I take $10 million worth of capital out of your bank, and he's like, Chad, it really doesn't matter. Like, he's like, if you're who I think you are and who I've heard you are, and you've got the debt service coverage ratio, we don't care. We'll loan you as much money as we possibly have to lend. So this can sound too good to be true, and there's a lot of information out there counter to this, but I have a ton of personal experience, and a ton of my friends who have taken the advice have done the exact same thing. So hopefully this is helpful. I know it's been a long-winded video, but it's something I've never actually taken the time to really get all of this out in a recording. So hopefully this was useful, and thanks so much for being part of our community, guys. Have a great day.